You swing your legs over the side of the bed, feeling the familiar, faint tightness in your lower back, a subtle rigidity that you have accepted as the tax of modern aging. You stand up, and your nervous system runs a background calculation, adjusting your posture, tilting your pelvis forward, and slightly compressing your lumbar spine to keep you upright. You likely blame your desk chair, your mattress, or the natural decay of your third decade on this planet. This is not another video telling you to drink warm lemon water, buy an ergonomic office chair, or perform generic hamstring stretches to cure your chronic fatigue and aching joints. Those are superficial interventions that address the symptoms of a much deeper, systemic failure. Instead, we are going to explore a biological design flaw created by the modern world, a severe mismatch between your ancestral evolutionary blueprint and your current physical reality. Deep within your core, buried beneath the abdominal wall and wrapped in a dense matrix of fascia, lies a single, forgotten muscle that acts as the primary master switch for your metabolic rate, your systemic inflammation, and your structural longevity. When it atrophies, your body enters a state of accelerated senescence. Mimicking the physiological profile of someone 20 years older. To understand why you feel stiff, lethargic, and structurally fragile, we must look past the superficial musculature like the rectus abdominis or the gluteus maximus and isolate the psoas major. This is not just a hip flexor. It is the only muscle in the human body that directly connects your appendicular skeleton to your axial skeleton, bridging the lower limbs directly to the lumbar spine. Specifically, the psoas major originates at the cross-sections of the 12th thoracic vertebra and the first lumbar vertebrae, traveling down through the pelvis to insert into the lesser trochanter of the femur. In our ancestral past, this muscle was a dynamic hydraulic shock absorber and a critical kinetic conduit, firing continuously as our ancestors traversed an even terrain for 12 miles a day. It was kept long, supple, and highly vascularized. Today, however, you spend an average of 9 to 11 hours sitting in a 90-degree hip flexion posture. In this position, the psoas major is chronically shortened, ischemic, and neurologically hypertonic. The brain, operating on the principle of neuromuscular efficiency, adapts to this constant shortening by permanently altering the muscle's resting length. When the psoas major shortens permanently, it acts like a tight bowstring on your spine. It exerts a continuous and yielding anterior shear force on the lumbar vertebrae, specifically at the L4, L5, and L5S1 junctions. This structural compression pulls your pelvis into a chronic anterior pelvic tilt, forcing your lumbar spine into hyperlordosis. To prevent you from falling forward, your nervous system must violently contract your erector spinae muscles, while simultaneously inhibiting your gluteal muscles through a neurological phenomenon known as reciprocal inhibition. Your glutes literally go blind to the brain's signals. As a result, every step you take no longer utilizes the massive power of the posterior chain. Instead, the mechanical shock of walking is transferred directly into your lower back discs and knee joints. This structural misalignment increases the mechanical load on your lumbar intervertebral discs by over 300%, accelerating disc degeneration, facet joint arthrosis, and spinal stenosis. You are quite literally crushing your spine from the inside out every single minute you stand, yet the structural devastation is merely the visible surface of a far more sinister cascade. The true terror of a short, locked psoas major lies in its hidden neurological and biochemical control over your organs and your brain. The psoas major does not sit in isolation. Its superior fibers weave directly into the crura of the respiratory diaphragm, the primary muscle of breathing. Furthermore, the sympathetic nervous system's principal highway, the sympathetic trunk, runs directly down the interior surface of the psoas major. When the psoas is chronically tight, fibrotic, and inflamed from lack of movement, it physically impinges upon this neural pathway and restricts the downward excursion of the diaphragm. Instead of deep, diaphragmatic breathing that stimulates the vagus nerve and activates the parasympathetic rest and digest response, you are forced into shallow, clavicular chest breathing. This shallow breathing pattern triggers a state of chronic, low-grade hyperventilation, altering your blood chemistry by abnormally lowering the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. This shift shifts your systemic pH into a state of mild respiratory alkalosis, which paradoxically reduces the delivery of oxygen to your cerebral tissues via the Bohr effect. Simultaneously, the mechanical pressure on the sympathetic trunk signals to the amygdala that you are under constant physical threat. Your body is locked in an artificial, endless fight-or-flight feedback loop. The adrenal cortex responds by secreting a sustained, pulsatile drip of cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. This is not the acute cortisol spike that helped our ancestors flee a predator. This is a chronic, non-resolving chemical inundation. Elevated baseline cortisol levels act as a metabolic toxin. It upregulates gluconeogenesis in the liver, dumping excess glucose into your bloodstream even if you haven't eaten a single carbohydrate. In response, your pancreas must secrete more insulin, eventually leading to peripheral insulin receptor downregulation, or insulin resistance. Your cells become deaf to insulin, meaning glucose cannot efficiently enter the mitochondria to be converted into adenosine triphosphate, the basic energy currency of life. This is why you feel chronically fatigued despite sleeping 8 hours, and why your body aggressively stores visceral fat around your internal organs. Visceral fat is not benign storage. It is an active endocrine organ that secretes pro-inflammatory cytokines such as tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin-6 directly into your portal vein. These cytokines travel straight to your liver and your vascular system, triggering systemic, low-grade vascular inflammation that accelerates cellular aging across every organ system in your body. Furthermore, the psoas major serves as a physical shelf for your abdominal viscera. When it is weak and structurally displaced, the spatial architecture of your pelvic and abdominal cavities is compromised. The cecum, the ascending colon, and the loops of the ileum lose their optimal structural support and compress downward. This mechanical compression impairs peristalsis, the rhythmic muscular contractions that move digesting food through your gastrointestinal tract. As a result, fecal transit time slows drastically, allowing pathogenic bacteria to overgrow in the small intestine, a condition known as small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. These bacteria ferment undigested food particles, producing excess hydrogen and methane gases that damage the delicate, single-cell thick epithelial lining of your gut. This leads to increased intestinal permeability, or leaky gut syndrome, allowing lipopolysaccharides endotoxic components of bacterial cell walls to translocate directly into your bloodstream. Your immune system recognizes these molecules as systemic invaders, unleashing a massive, chronic inflammatory response that degrades the blood-brain barrier, leading to cognitive decline, brain fog, and the degradation of neurological health. By failing to maintain the length and health of this single, buried muscle, you have inadvertently optimized your physiology for rapid degeneration. The mechanical collapse of your core and the subsequent biochemical chaos do not stop at your gut lining. The structural degeneration cascades directly into your cardiovascular system, specifically targeting your vascular endothelium, the delicate, single-cell thick lining of your blood vessels. Because your shortened psoas major has forced your pelvis into a permanent anterior tilt, the femoral artery, femoral vein, and femoral nerve are subjected to continuous mechanical entrapment as they pass beneath the inguinal ligament. This region, known as the femoral triangle, becomes a bottleneck for systemic circulation. The physical compression of the femoral vein severely impairs venous return from your lower extremities back to the heart. Your heart must pump harder against a higher hydrostatic pressure gradient to pull blood out of your legs, leading to an increase in systemic peripheral resistance and elevated baseline blood pressure. This chronic hydrostatic stress damages the endothelial cells, causing them to lose their ability to synthesize nitric oxide. Without adequate nitric oxide, your blood vessels lose their elasticity and cannot dilate effectively, causing arterial stiffness to skyrocket. This state of permanent vascular stiffness forces your left ventricle to hypertrophy, or thicken, as it struggles to pump blood into a high-pressure system. At the same time, the reduction in venous return decreases the overall stroke volume of your heart, meaning your tissues receive less oxygenated, nutrient-rich blood with every beat. On a cellular level, this microischemia forces your cells to rely more heavily on anaerobic glycolysis for energy production, which generates a high volume of lactic acid and free radicals, creating systemic oxidative stress. The cellular powerhouses, your mitochondria, bear the brunt of this damage. Free radicals mutate mitochondrial DNA and oxidize membrane lipids, disrupting the electron transport chain. Instead of producing clean energy, your damaged mitochondria begin to leak electrons, creating even more reactive oxygen species in a destructive, self-accelerating loop known as mitochondrial decay. This is the exact cellular mechanism that drives systemic aging, skin wrinkling, and organ degradation simultaneously. The chronic physical tension of the psoas major exerts a destructive influence on your lymphatic system. The cisterna chyli, the major collecting reservoir for lymphatic fluid from the entire lower half of the body, sits directly anterior to the first and second lumbar vertebrae, precisely where the superior fibers of the psoas major originate and interweave with the diaphragm. When the psoas is hypertonic and the diaphragm is restricted, the mechanical pumping action that drives lymphatic flow is completely paralyzed. Lymphatic fluid, which carries metabolic waste products, cellular debris, and dead immune cells away from your tissues, pools and stagnates in your lower torso and limbs. This lymphatic congestion turns your interstitial fluid into a toxic, stagnant swamp. Your immune cells, particularly your natural killer cells and T lymphocytes, become sluggish and unresponsive in this toxic environment. Their capacity for immunosurveillance, the process of identifying and destroying mutated, precancerous cells and viral invaders, is severely compromised. This failure of immunosurveillance opens the door to a state known as cellular senescence. When damaged cells can no longer be efficiently cleared by your immune system, they do not simply die. Instead, they enter a zombie-like state, permanently rested in their cell cycle but remaining metabolically active. These senescent cells begin to secrete a highly toxic cocktail of chemical signals known as the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SASP. This cocktail consists of a dense concentration of matrix metalloproteinase, chemokines, and pro-inflammatory interleukins. The SASP factors bleed out into the surrounding healthy tissue, acting like a contagious cellular poison that forces neighboring healthy cells to also become senescent. This chain reaction causes widespread tissue degradation, destroying the collagen matrix of your skin, your joints, and your internal organs, effectively aging your body at an exponential rate from the deep interior outward. Furthermore, this internal structural collapse fundamentally alters your neuroendocrine axis, specifically targeting the production of your primary youth hormones, growth hormone and testosterone. Under healthy ancestral conditions, your body releases large pulses of growth hormone during deep, slow-wave sleep to repair cellular damage, synthesize new proteins, and burn fat. However, because your hypertonic psoas muscle has locked your nervous system into a chronic sympathetic fight-or-flight state, your sleep architecture is profoundly disrupted. Your brain struggles to transition into and remain in stage 3 and stage 4 deep sleep, instead spending the night stuck in light, superficial sleep stages. Without deep slow-wave sleep, your nocturnal pulse of growth hormone drops by up to 70%. Your muscles cannot recover, your brain cannot clear its metabolic waste via the lymphatic system, and your cellular repair mechanisms come to a grinding halt. For men, this chronic stress state drastically downregulates the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. The brain releases less luteinizing hormone, signaling the Leydig cells in the testes to reduce testosterone production. For women, this chronic sympathetic dominance disrupts the delicate balance between progesterone and estrogen, leading to estrogen dominance, cycle irregularities, and accelerated ovarian aging. Testosterone and growth hormone are not just for building muscle. They are critical survival hormones that maintain bone mineral density, preserve endothelial health, upregulate cognitive function, and keep the brain's microglia from triggering neuroinflammation. When these hormones drop, your bone remodeling cycle becomes negative, meaning you lose bone mass faster than you can rebuild it, setting the stage for early onset osteopenia and structural frailty. You lose muscle mass, a condition called sarcopenia, and that muscle is progressively replaced by intramuscular fat, turning your physical body into a weak and stable shell. The final frontier of this structural and biochemical destruction is your brain and central nervous system. Your spinal cord is enclosed within a tough, fibrous membrane called the dura mater. The dura mater is anchored directly to the coccyx at the base of the spine and travels all the way up through the spinal canal to attach to the foramen magnum at the base of your skull. Because the shortened psoas major continuously pulls the lumbar spine forward and compresses the vertebrae, it creates a constant, abnormal mechanical tension on the entire dural sac. This phenomenon, known as adverse mechanical cord tension, physically pulls down on the brainstem and the cerebellum. This structural traction restricts the natural, rhythmic flow of cerebrospinal fluid, which must pump smoothly up and down the spinal cord to flush metabolic waste out of the brain. When this fluid flow is restricted, toxic proteins like beta-amyloid and tau tangles begin to accumulate in the cerebral cortex, directly driving the onset of neurodegenerative decline and destroying your cognitive processing speed. To reverse this systemic decay, we must bypass superficial physical therapy protocols and target the deep mechanical and neurological roots of the psoas major. The solution is not a series of passive, aggressive stretches. Forcing an ischemic, hypertonic muscle into an extreme stretch simply triggers the myotatic stretch reflex, causing the muscle spindles to fire violently and contract the muscle even further to protect it from tearing. We must instead use structural recalibration, utilizing exact biological levers to down-regulate the nervous system, release the physical adhesions in the deep fascia, and restore the hydraulic integrity of your core. The first step in this physiological restoration requires the mechanical uncoupling of the psoas major from the respiratory diaphragm. This is achieved through a precise somatic decompression sequence known as the psoas release position. You must lie supine on a flat, firm surface, with your knees bent at a 90-degree angle and your feet flat on the floor, spaced approximately hip-width apart. In this specific anatomical orientation, the origin and insertion of the psoas major are brought into closest proximity, completely removing all passive tension from the muscle fibers. Once in this position, you must implement a specific breathing protocol designed to shift your autonomic nervous system from sympathetic dominance to parasympathetic dominance. You will inhale through your nose for a strict count of 4 seconds, using only the lower abdomen to expand your lower rib cage laterally, completely avoiding any movement of the upper chest. This is followed by a slow, audible exhaling through pursed lips for a count of 8 seconds. At the end of the 8th second, you must pause and hold your breath for a count of 4 seconds before the next inhalation. This specific breath configuration, a 4-second inhale, an 8-second exhale, and a 4-second hold, gradually increases the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in your arterial blood. This elevation reverses the respiratory alkalosis caused by chronic shallow breathing, allowing oxygen to detach from hemoglobin molecules and flood back into your ischemic tissues via the Bohr effect. More importantly, this slow, extended exhalation stimulates the auricular and pharyngeal branches of the vagus nerve, sending an immediate inhibitory signal to the sinoatrial node of your heart, lowering your heart rate, and shutting down the adrenal gland's pulsatile release of cortisol. As the baseline cortisol drop occurs, the chronic neurological guarding of the psoas major dissolves, allowing blood to flow back into the deep capillary beds of the muscle tissue. Once the nervous system has dropped its protective guarding, we must address the structural inhibition of the gluteal muscles using the law of reciprocal inhibition. Because your psoas has been tight for decades, your brain has literally forgotten how to fire the gluteus maximus, a neurological deficit called gluteal amnesia. To fix this, you must transition into a modified single-leg isometric gluteal bridge. While lying on your back, you will pull one knee tightly to your chest, holding it with both arms. This action forces that specific side of the pelvis into deep hip flexion, mechanically locking the lumbar spine into a flat, neutral position and preventing any compensatory spinal hyperextension. With the opposite foot flat on the floor, you will drive your heel downward, lifting your hips just 3 inches off the ground by contracting only your gluteus maximus. You must hold this intense contraction at the peak for a strict count of 10 seconds, repeating this for 5 sets per side. By forcing the gluteus maximus into a high-load isometric contraction while the hip is in a neutral or slightly extended position, your brain sends a massive volley of efferent motor signals down the sciatic nerve. According to Sherrington's law of reciprocal inhibition, when a motor cortex violently fires an agonist muscle, the gluteus maximus, it must simultaneously send an absolute inhibitory signal through the lumbar plexus to force the antagonist muscle, the psoas major, to relax completely. This exercise acts like a neurological reset switch, instantly breaking the hypertonic hold of the psoas and restoring the structural balance of your pelvis. Finally, we must break up the physical, fibrotic collagen crosslinks that have bound the psoas major to the surrounding iliacus and quadratus lumbar muscles. This requires targeted manual fascial release. While lying on your back with your knees slightly bent to slacken the abdominal wall, you must locate your anterior superior iliac spine, the bony prominence at the front of your hip, moving 2 inches medially toward your belly button and 2 inches inferiorly toward your feet. You will slowly sink your fingers deep into the abdominal cavity, aiming back toward the front of your lumbar spine at a 45-degree angle. As you sink into the tissue, you will feel a deep, dull ache, confirming you have reached the fascial sheath of the psoas major. While maintaining steady, deep pressure, you will slowly slide the leg on that same side down along the floor until it is fully extended, and then pull it back up to the starting position. Repeating this dynamic movement 10 times per side mechanically shears the bound fascial layers, melting away adhesions, restoring fluid sliding mechanics between the muscle groups, and immediately relieving the interior shear force on your lower back vertebrae. The physical restoration of your psoas major and the reawakening of your gluteal architecture pave the way for the final, critical phase of human optimization, aligning your daily movement patterns with your evolutionary design. Your body is a highly adaptive, self-assembling system that reshapes itself based on the specific mechanical stresses you place upon it. If you spend your day sitting, your body will optimize itself for sitting by short-circuiting your core, degrading your vascular system, and calcifying your joints. To permanently lock in your structural and biochemical youth, you must deliberately introduce ancestral movement triggers back into your modern environment. The most powerful tool for this is the implementation of a strict 20-minute walking rule immediately following your largest meals. When you walk, your hips move through a complete cycle of flexion and extension, dynamically stretching and contracting the psoas major with every single stride. This continuous, low-load movement acts as a dynamic pump for the local venous and lymphatic networks, flushing out stagnation and preventing the accumulation of the toxic senescent cells that drive rapid aging. Furthermore, this post-meal movement completely transforms your metabolic profile. As your muscles contract during a walk, they recruit glucose transporter type for proteins, or GLUT for receptors, to the cell membranes of your skeletal muscle tissue. These receptors pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream without requiring insulin. By dropping your postprandial blood glucose spikes by up to 40%, you effectively shield your vascular endothelium from the destructive process of advanced glycation and products formation. Your blood vessels remain highly elastic, your pancreas is protected from burnout, and your body stays firmly rooted in a fat-burning, highly energized state. To further reinforce this ancestral adaptation, you must replace your standard sitting habits with intermittent deep squats. For millions of years, our ancestors did not sit on chairs. They squatted to rest, to cook, and to socialize. Spending just 5 cumulative minutes a day in a deep, passive squat opens the hip joints, decompresses the lumbar spine, and keeps the psoas major at its optimal evolutionary length. By systematically addressing the deep structural, neurological, and biochemical roots of the psoas major, you are doing far more than just curing back pain or shedding visceral fat. You are reclaiming control over the very master switches that dictate how fast you age. You are shifting your autonomic nervous system away from the corrosive, high cortisol fight-or-flight state and anchoring it firmly in the restorative, growth hormone-rich parasympathetic state. You are healing your gut barrier, clearing out cellular senescence, and restoring the youthful, clean flow of blood, lymph, and cerebrospinal fluid throughout your entire engineered system. Do not accept the physical decay, the chronic exhaustion, and the joint stiffness of modern aging as an inevitable reality. Your body has an extraordinary, built-in blueprint for longevity, structural resilience, and absolute vitality. It is not broken. It is simply waiting for you to look past the superficial trends, understand its brilliant ancestral engineering, and finally clear the path so it can heal itself. Continue for part 3.